With a flick of his finger, a strand of white flames appeared in front of Yang Yi. As he gazed at the little tongue of flames that was only the size of his thumb, Yang Yi had a solemn expression. Based on its outward appearance, the tongue of flames seemed to be like an ordinary tongue of flames, and besides its ghastly white-colored appearance, it didn't look different at all. Yang Yi took a deep breath, stopped hesitating, and flicked his finger. A strand of golden sword chi that was enhanced by his 4th-level sword intent shot out explosively from the tip of his finger. At the moment this strand of golden sword chi appeared, the nether ghost flame in front of Yang Yi transformed into a fiery glow that attached itself onto the strand of golden sword chi. With 4th-level sword intent and the nether ghost flame surrounding it, that strand of golden sword chi instantly became terrifying. Everywhere it passed, space seemed to have been burnt, causing a very long white mark to appear in space. Under Yang Ye's gaze that was filled with excitement and anticipation, the strand of golden sword chi collided with a tree in the distance that was wide to the point it required around 10 people to hug completely. Bang! Along with a resounding explosion, the enormous tree was blasted into pieces before Yang Ye's astounded gaze. And then it suddenly started burning just like the tree from before. In less than an instant, that enormous tree had transformed into a pile of black ash that scattered all over the ground. However, the golden strand of sword chi hadn't vanished, and it was shooting explosively towards the distance without losing momentum at all. Bang! Numerous explosions resounded once more. However, to Yang Ye's shock, the sword chi hadn't vanished after successively burning over 10 trees into ash. After all, he was already over 300 m away from that strand of sword chi. In the past, because of the profound energy he possessed, the golden sword chi he executed were able to exist for a certain period of time after he'd executed the attack. Moreover, with the enhancement of his sword intent, his sword chi was able to travel a distance of over 120 m away from him. This was his limit. Yet now, the sword chi hadn't dispersed after traveling over 300 m away from him. Moreover, it was under the circumstances that it had already blasted apart and incinerated more than 10 trees. Is the nether ghost flame really so terrifying? A mountain wall resided over 300 m away, and that strand of sword chi directly pierced into the wall. After a moment of silence, an enormous bang resounded before the mountain wall was suddenly blasted apart. In a few breaths of time, a pitch-black and bottomless hole that was around 15 m in both width and height had appeared on the mountain wall. Yang Yi gulped down a mouthful of saliva as he gazed at the pitch-black hole. The might of sword intent combined with the nether ghost flame is truly terrifying. Just that strike alone would have been more than enough to instantly annihilate some experts at the King Realm. Right at this moment, a ray of fiery light suddenly shot out from the mountain wall, and then it flashed and arrived in front of Yang Yi. Yang Yi took another deep breath as he gazed at the ghastly white tongue of flame before him. It really does deserve to be a precious treasure of the heavens and the earth. Such might is truly too terrifying. After he kept the nether ghost flame within the tiny vortex, Yang Yi bowed to Elder Mu and said, "Elder Mu, I'm truly unable to repay such kindness. If you need me in the future, then feel free to provide me with your instructions. So long as I, Yang Yi, am capable of it, I definitely won't refuse." Even though he didn't know what this mysterious old man wanted him to do in the future, he didn't mind so long as it didn't go against his principles, and he was resolved to accomplish the task that the old man entrusted to him in the future. It could be said that Yang Yi wouldn't be able to possess his current accomplishments without this old man. Just like it was said before, even though they weren't master and disciple in name, they were like master and disciple through the relationship they possessed. Or perhaps, it could be said that in Yang Ye's heart, he'd taken this old man to be his master. Elder Mu grinned and said, "I'll remember what you said. I hope that you'll think in the same way when the time comes. Alright, let's not talk about that for now. Your physical body has already arrived at a certain level now, and if you want to accomplish another qualitative improvement, then you must find the treasure of the heavens and the earth that I spoke of. There's a place called the Cold Wind Tunnel at the ancient battlefield, and that treasure resides in the deepest depths of the Cold Wind Tunnel. It's called the Ninth Hell Cold Gale. Of course, The precondition is that no experts have noticed the ninth hell-cold gale. The ninth hell-cold gale? Yang Yi was puzzled. Elder Mu, what's that? The ninth hell-cold gale leaves no traces. It's born in the ninth hell, and it can only gain intelligence after existing for a few thousands of years. All those years ago, it hadn't formed intelligence of its own when I was at the cold wind tunnel. It was still in a chaotic state, so I hadn't taken it. Now that 1,000 years have passed, I presume that it has probably formed its intelligence. So, you can try your luck, said Elder Mu. Yang Yi nodded. After he witnessed how formidable the nether ghost flame was, he was extremely interested in the ninth hell-cold gale that Elder Mu spoke about. Since it was a treasure of the heavens and the earth just like the nether ghost flame, then its might was definitely indisputable. If he was able to suddenly utilize both of these treasures of the heavens and the earth in battle, then it would definitely give his opponent an extremely huge, pleasant surprise. When he saw the expression Yang Yi revealed, Elder Mu knew what Yang Yi was thinking, and he immediately shook his head and said, "Could it be that you think that the ninth hell-cold gale is yours already?" Yang Yi scratched his head with embarrassment when he heard this, and then he said, "Elder Mu, is the ninth hell-cold gale even more terrifying than the nether ghost flame?" "Not at all," Elder Mu said. "But you have to understand that the nether ghost flame was already subdued and tamed by me before I gave it to you. On the other hand, you have to head to the cold wind tunnel to obtain the ninth hell-cold gale yourself. The difference between these two situations is extremely huge. After all, the nether ghost flame was within the boundless ocean of flames in the ghost territory. With your current strength, not to mention heading into the depths of the ocean of flames, even approaching the ocean of flames would probably be impossible for you. On the other hand, the cold wind tunnel where the ninth hell-cold gale resides is filled with boundless cold winds and in attribute wind. It's even greater than the boundless ocean of flames." Yang Ye's expression froze when he heard this, and then he said, "Elder Mu, then aren't you asking me to give my life away by asking me to search for the ninth hell-cold gale?" Elder Mu said, "If it was a few days ago, then you would really be courting death if you went to look for the ninth hell-cold gale. But now, with the physical body and the 4th-level sword intent you possess, you may have a chance at resisting the endlessine attribute and cold winds in the cold wind tunnel. Especially your current physical body, it should be able to resist the cold winds there, but you'll probably have to suffer a little." Yang Yi heaved a sigh of relief. "It's fine so long as I have a chance." All he was afraid of was having no chance at all. As for some pain, had he not suffered a great deal already? Besides that, you must remember not to underestimate your enemies at the ancient battlefield. You really are practically invincible amongst the younger generation of the Southern Territory. However, the geniuses amongst geniuses gather at the ancient battlefield. When compared with the Southern Territory, no matter if it was cultivation techniques or inheritances, the other territories are much more superior to the Southern Territory, said Elder Mu. Yang Yi nodded and said, "Elder Mu, don't worry. I won't underestimate any opponent. However, after I heard Elder Mu speak like that, I really want to see these monstrous geniuses of the other territories." Elder Mu grinned and said, "Perhaps you're still unaware, but the overall strength of the Southern Territory is the weakest amongst all the territories. Besides the founding ancestor of the Sword Sect who'd swept through the ancient battlefield by himself and crushed the geniuses from all the territories, there hadn't been another person from the Southern Territory that has been capable of that for the last 10,000 years. You must understand that he crushed them to the point that all the young monstrous geniuses of the other territories had submitted before him." Yang Yi suddenly said, "Elder Mu, are you or the Sword Sect's founding ancestor stronger?" Elder Mu slowly restrained his smile when he heard this. After a short while, he shook his head and said with a smile on his face, "Kid, you're actually trying to compare me with him?" When he spoke up to hear, Elder Mu suddenly sighed and said, "There's probably no one in the Southern Territory who can compare to him. I can't as well. After all, he relied on the sword in his hand to completely crush the path of ascension that instills fear in countless extraordinary experts." "The path of ascension?" Yang Yi frowned and said, "Elder Mu, what's that?" Elder Mu shook his head and said, "If you don't die prematurely, then you might be able to see that path in the future." Alright, it'll be time for you to head to the ancient battlefield in a few days. So go on. Don't die prematurely. As soon as he finished speaking, Elder Mu didn't speak another word. With a wave of his right hand, a blue teleportation circle appeared in front of Yang Yi, and then he turned around and walked slowly into the cottage. Yang Yi smiled bitterly as he gazed at the tightly shut door of the cottage. Elder Mu really is very mysterious, just like my tiny vortex. With Elder Mu's strength, he should be renowned throughout the Southern Territory. However, for some unknown reason, Elder Mu's name doesn't exist in the entire Southern Territory. Moreover, why would Elder Mu be living in seclusion at the bottom of Death Abyss? Yang Yi shook his head and stopped thinking about this. Presently, his most important objective was to improve his strength as soon as possible, and then find a way to rescue his mother. As for everything else, he truly shouldn't waste time and energy to give it unnecessary concern. In any case, everything would fall into place in the end. Yang Yi bowed respectfully towards the cottage, and then he didn't stay here anymore and stepped into the blue circle. Right when Yang Yi vanished in the blue circle, the door to the cottage opened slowly before Elder Mu walked out from within the cottage. He gazed towards the Grand Qin Empire while fluctuations surged in his eyes, and he seemed to have thought of something. After a short while, he sighed faintly and said, "Sure enough, not everything can be deduced. The Heaven Tao really does vary." After he returned to the Grand Qin Empire, Yang Yi obtained the information related to the ancient battlefield that Xianxia had sent over. However, the information didn't mention anything about the other territories, causing Yang Yi to fall silent as he looked through the information. Why would the Empire and the six great powers conceal the information about the other territories? Right at this moment, a strand of white light flashed by, and then a graceful figure suddenly appeared in front of Yang Yi and interrupted his deep thought. "Ho ho! Little Yi, what are you thinking so seriously about? Could it be that you missed me? We were merely apart for around a month, so there's no need to miss me like that." A soft and charming voice suddenly resounded by Yang Ye's ear, and it caused Yang Yi to instantly feel slightly restless. It was none other than In Shanner, who he hadn't seen for over a month. After being apart for over a month, In Shanner was still so graceful and enchanting, especially when she revealed her charm on purpose. Coupled with her peerless appearance and hot figure, even Yang Yi couldn't help but start breathing rapidly. Yang Yi took a deep breath, and with a command in his heart, his sword intent was released from within him, allowing Yang Ye's mind to instantly clear up. As he gazed at the stunner standing before him, he spoke indifferently. Miss Yin really knows how to choose the best time to make an appearance. In the past, he didn't understand why this woman had left before he went to participate in the Ascension rankings, but he had a vague understanding now. If he wasn't wrong, then she'd probably expected that his life would be in danger. In Shanner didn't become infuriated by Yang Ye's ridicule, and she smiled in a charming manner and said, "You've misjudged me this time. I didn't leave for the reasons you're thinking of, and I left for your own good. Is that so?" Yang Yi said indifferently, "So, I should thank you?" In Shanner smiled and said, "Of course. You should understand that if they noticed that I was with you, then no matter how monstrous your natural talent is or how terrifying your potential is, you'll definitely die. Not to mention protecting you, the founding emperor of the Grand Qin Empire would probably be the first to make a move to kill you. So, the relationship between us can't be exposed at all. Otherwise, the entire Southern Territory would probably not tolerate your existence." Yang Yi fell silent when he heard this, because this woman's words did make sense. However, he would naturally not believe that this woman would be so kind as to be thoughtful and considerate towards him. He'd never had a good impression of this woman, and he even had a strong feeling of vigilance towards her, because his intuition told him that this woman was definitely a dangerous person. In Shanner suddenly asked, "Will you be heading to the ancient battlefield?" Yang Yi was surprised and said, "How did you know?" When she heard Yang Yi, In Shanner restrained her charming smile and laughed coldly. The founding emperor really didn't have any good intentions. Yang Yi frowned and said, "What do you mean? Do you know what the ancient battlefield is?" asked In Shanner. Yang Yi hesitated for a moment before he nodded and said, Isn't it just the place where the geniuses of all the territories are gathering? A wisp of surprise flashed in In Shanner's eyes when she heard this, and then she said, I never expected that you would actually be aware of that. It wasn't the founding emperor that told you all of this, right? Xianxia nodded, and then he said, How did you know that it wasn't the founding emperor? Xianxia felt that there was something off here. In Shanner sighed and said, You're aware that the ancient battlefield is the place where the young geniuses of all the territories gather. But do you know why they've gathered at the Southern Territory? To be more precise, do you know the objectives they came to the Southern Territory with? Xianxia shook his head because Elder Mu hadn't told him about that. There's an imperceptible and unreal thing on profounder continent called karmic luck. Can't be seen, touched, or felt. However, it really does exist. In Shanner said, There's a place called the Hidden Dragon Pagoda at the ancient battlefield, because those that are able to enter the pagoda are all the extraordinarily monstrous geniuses of the various territories. The Hidden Dragon Pagoda is also called the Monstrous Genius Pagoda. The Monstrous Genius Pagoda is their objective. Xianxia gazed at In Shanner to display that she should continue. The reason the monstrous geniuses of these other territories travel to the ancient battlefield to ascend the Monstrous Genius Pagoda is that there's a top-grade dragon vein beneath the pagoda. Cultivating in the Hidden Dragon Pagoda for a day is equivalent to cultivating for a year in the outside world, especially at the highest level of the pagoda, the 5th level. A single day of cultivation there is equivalent to 5 years of time. Of course, most importantly, the dragon vein can provide karmic luck to the person cultivating there and the power that person represents, said In Shanner. You're saying that the founding emperor wants me to represent the Grand Qin Empire and ascend the Hidden Dragon Pagoda in order to increase the karmic luck of the Grand Qin Empire? Xianxia said in a low voice, But why didn't he tell me directly? In Shanner rolled her eyes at him and said, If he told you how terrifying the ancient battlefield and Hidden Dragon Pagoda were, you probably wouldn't go there. Don't ever think that you're very formidable because you've comprehended 4th level sword intent and the enlightened sword intent. To be frank, with your current strength, you probably wouldn't even be able to ascend the 3rd level of the Hidden Dragon Pagoda. Xianxia shook his head and disregarded her words before he said, What's the karmic luck that you spoke of? When he spoke about karmic luck, In Shanner's expression became serious and she said, It's an unreal and imperceptible thing, but it's undeniable that it really does exist. Do you know why my Shang dynasty was destroyed? Or do you know why the Sword Sect has fallen into decline yet still exists? Xianxia shook his head and asked, It's related to karmic luck? He didn't believe this sort of thing. If a person doesn't work hard, then could it be that one could become an expert by relying solely on this thing called karmic luck? In Shanner sighed and said, Don't doubt it. Karmic luck really exists. Otherwise, the extraordinary experts of the other territories wouldn't pay hefty prices in order to make a path through the barriers between the territories, and then allow the youths of their territories to travel to the Southern Territory and fight for karmic luck in the Hidden Dragon Pagoda. Besides that, karmic luck is also the reason why the Sword Sect has been able to exist for 10,000 years and avoid destruction even when it has fallen into decline. After all, the Sword Sect's founding ancestor swept through all the extraordinarily monstrous geniuses of the other territories in the Hidden Dragon Pagoda. Even if it was those extraordinarily monstrous geniuses from the Central Territory that is said to be the most terrifying and possesses the most monstrous genius were completely and utterly convinced of their inferiority by the Sword Sect's founding ancestor. Xianxia laughed bitterly when he heard this. Looks like the founding ancestor of the Sword Sect really was a peerless expert. Even when others mention him 10,000 years later, they still carry deep respect towards him. However, he would have probably never imagined that the Sword Sect would become the weakest amongst the 6 great powers 10,000 years later. You really shouldn't have agreed to head to the ancient battlefield. In Shanner sighed and said, The lowest cultivation possessed by the young geniuses there is the King Realm. You're merely at the 7th rank of the 1st Heaven Realm now, so you're greatly inferior to them in terms of your cultivation. After all, even though the gap between the King Realm and the 1st Heaven Realm isn't like the gap between the heavens and the earth, it's still extremely huge. Especially when it's King Realm profounders who are monstrous geniuses. Everyone really doesn't look favorably upon me. Xianxia smiled, and then he suddenly asked, "You said that karmic luck is very important to these sects and powers?" "It's extremely important." In Shanner nodded and said, "You've probably heard of the final objective behind the ascension rankings held by the Grand Qin Empire and the six great powers. Actually, it was all done for the sake of the Hidden Dragon Pagoda at the ancient battlefield. They seek to select profounders with strength and potential, and then send these profounders to the ancient battlefield to represent them to fight for the karmic luck in Hidden Dragon Pagoda. You said that I would be courting death by heading there. Then if those fellows who couldn't even defeat me were to head to the ancient battlefield, then wouldn't they even lack the qualifications to court death? Since it's like that, then why do they still intend to send those profounders to the ancient battlefield?" said Yang Yi. "You couldn't be thinking that those disciples who participated in the ascension rankings were the most outstanding disciples of the various powers, right?" asked In Shanner. "Could it be that they weren't?" Yang Yi frowned and said, "Don't tell me that the Origin School has someone that's an even more monstrous genius than Yuan Tong." "That's not the case." In Shanner shook her head and said, "Yuan Tong's natural talent really can be considered to be that of an extraordinarily monstrous genius in the Southern Territory. With his strength, he shouldn't have participated in the ascension rankings. However, he'd participated in order to attain the title of Martial God and obtain the acknowledgement of that existence of Martial God Mountain. But never had he imagined. No, I should say that the entire Origin School had never imagined that a quasi-sword emperor would actually appear during a tiny competition like the Ascension Rankings. Moreover, that quasi-sword emperor would actually be able to incomprehensibly utilize a Dao artifact. Alas, the Origin School can be considered to have suffered a huge loss this time." Yang Yi shook his head, stopped discussing this matter, and said, "Miss In, you probably won't be following me to the ancient battlefield, right?" In Shanner shook her head and said, "I came looking for you this time for the sake of getting the gold guards in that vortex of yours. Right, in other words, we're going to part ways." When he heard this, Yang Yi hurriedly waved his hand, and the 12 gold guards appeared in front of In Shanner. After that, he said, "Miss In, even though we didn't really get along, I still hope that you'll be safe." This she-devil was finally about to leave, and it was undoubtedly a piece of good news to him. As she watched Xianxia's actions, In Shanner glanced resentfully at him and said, "Are you really so anxious for me to leave? In any case, we can be considered to be friends now, right?" Yang Yi neither agreed or disagreed as he smiled and remained silent. He hadn't taken this woman to be a friend. What a joke! This woman was even more scheming than Xianxia. Moreover, she'd had ill intent towards him since the beginning. Consider her as a friend? Yang Yi wasn't an idiot. In Shanner sighed when she saw the expression on Yang Ye's face, and then she said, "Just as you said, even though we didn't really get along with each other, I hope you'll be able to return alive from the ancient battlefield." When she spoke up to hear, she paused for a moment before she said, "It's best if you don't return. If you have the chance, then head to the Central Territory. With the potential and natural talent you possess, there'll definitely be an extraordinary sect there that's willing to take you in. So long as an extraordinary sect of the Central Territory takes a liking to you, then you'll definitely skyrocket into the heavens." "Is something about to happen in the Southern Territory?" asked Yang Yi in a low voice. In Shanner's lips parted slightly, yet she shook her head and smiled in the end. She said, "Forget about that. No matter what, just listen to my advice this time. I hope that we'll be able to meet again in the future." As soon as she finished speaking, In Shanner waved her hand, and then she transformed into a strand of white light that vanished along with the 12 gold guards. Yang Ye's brows knit together tightly as he watched In Shanner leave. What exactly is about to occur in the Southern Territory? Could it be that conflict is about to arise between the 6 great powers and the Grand Qin Empire? But it doesn't seem likely. After all, everyone is living harmoniously with each other, and there aren't any huge conflicts of interest between them. So, it's clearly impossible for them to go to war with each other. However, if the Grand Qin Empire and the 6 great powers aren't about to go to war, then how would the Southern Territory fall into chaos? Who possesses such extraordinary ability to accomplish that? After a short while, Yang Yi shook his head and stopped thinking about all of this. These weren't things that he should be worrying about because it didn't matter to him whether the Southern Territory fell into chaos or not. Moreover, he felt that it was even better the more chaotic it became. After all, he really disliked all of these powers. 4 days later, the geniuses ranked in the top 30 positions of the Ascension rankings had suddenly vanished from the imperial capital. They'd naturally headed to the ancient battlefield. It wasn't just those profounders ranked on the Ascension rankings. Various other elites and secret troops from the Grand Qin Empire and genius disciples from the 6 great powers had headed to the ancient battlefield as well. If the Ascension rankings was related to the rise and decline of the various powers in the short term, then the fight for karmic luck at the ancient battlefield was related to the rise and fall of the various powers in the long term. So, the Grand Qin Empire and the 6 great powers. No, it should be said that the Southern Territory had dispatched all its elites, and it hadn't held back at all, especially the sects in the Southern Territory. It wasn't inner court disciples that they dispatched this time, and it was the elite disciples of their sects who had attained the King Realm. There was an enormous teleportation formation on a mountain outside the imperial capital. At this moment, the figures of youths densely covered the area below the teleportation platform. Amongst these youths were independent cultivators, the disciples of the various clans, and the disciples of the sections. At this moment, their faces were covered in excitement and delight, because the Grand Qin Empire and the 6 great powers hadn't just given them countless cultivation resources this time, they were even provided guarantees that they would become elite disciples of their sects if they were able to ascend to the 2nd level of the Hidden Dragon Pagoda. Elite disciples. This was something that they couldn't help but be tempted by, especially those independent cultivators. Even though it wasn't a problem at all for the profounders standing here to join the 6 great powers, becoming an elite disciple of the 6 great powers wasn't realistic. On the other hand, the difference in the treatment received by elite disciples and the inner court disciples could be said to be like the gap between the heavens and the earth. So, countless profounders here, especially those independent cultivators, were extraordinarily excited and delighted. As for the dangers of the ancient battlefield that the Grand Qin Empire and the 6 great powers had told them about, they'd completely disregarded it. Most times, and especially when it was before enormous temptation, most people tended to forget the dangers they had to face. As for the disciples of the sects, when they found out that they would encounter the monstrous geniuses of the other territories at the ancient battlefield, all of them weren't fearful at all. Conversely, they were excited and elated. Most geniuses had a common characteristic, and it was pride. They didn't feel that they were inferior to others at all. On the teleportation platform, Li Si shook his head inwardly as he gazed at the crowd below the platform. How many of these youths would be able to return alive from the ancient battlefield? Everyone. I hope all of you'll be able to attain great results at the Hidden Dragon Pagoda in the ancient battlefield. I've already told all of you about the dangers there, so if you intend to regret your decision and withdraw yourself, then you can do so right now. Once you've headed there, then you'll have no chance to regret your decision, said Li Si. All the profounders below shook their heads upon hearing this. What a joke! Cultivating in the Hidden Dragon Pagoda for a day was comparable to a year of cultivation, and they'd even received the promise of rewards from the Grand Qin Empire and the 6 great powers. So, only an idiot would give up such a great opportunity. Li Si nodded when he saw that no one intended to withdraw, and then he said, "Since all of you have no objections, then please enter the teleportation formation." However, no one in the crowd below had moved. The countless profounders shot their gazes towards the figures standing in the frontmost row. These figures belonged to the elite disciples of the Grand Qin Empire and the 6 great powers. Most of them were unfamiliar faces, but there were also some familiar faces like Yuan Tong, Leng Xinran, Wan Renyu, and Murong Yao. Right when everyone was silent, the Origin School's elite disciple stepped forward, swept everyone with his gaze, and then said, "In the past, the first position on the Ascension ranking has always belonged to my Origin School. This year, it was seized by an outer court disciple of the Sword Sect. Yuan Xiao would really like to meet this young man called Yang Yi. I wonder who is Yang Yi. Why don't you step out from the crowd so that I can meet you?" When he heard Yuan Xiao, Yuan Tong's expression instantly turned slightly unsightly. However, he didn't flare up. After he lost his qualifications to become the martial god, it meant that he was unable to obtain the inheritance on Martial God Mountain. Without that inheritance, he didn't have any qualifications or right to be proud before these senior elite disciples of the Origin School. After a short while, when he didn't see Yang Yi, Yuan Xiu laughed coldly and said, "What? The first on the Ascension rankings and the Quasi-Sword Emperor doesn't even have the courage to meet me." However, Yang Yi still didn't show himself. Yuan Xiu's face fell, and then he gazed at the elite disciple that led the group from the Sword Sect and said, "Jian Wuji, so this is how the disciples of your Sword Sect act? He doesn't even have the courage to meet me?" The young man called Jian Wuji chuckled and said, "Yuan Xiu, you're mistaken. Even though Yang Yi represented my Sword Sect during the Ascension rankings, he isn't a disciple of my Sword Sect. The enmity between him and both the Flower Palace and your Origin School isn't related to my Sword Sect at all. Feel free to go look for him. My Sword Sect won't interfere." Yuan Xiu laughed coldly and said, "It's best if it's like that, otherwise, don't blame me for not giving consideration to the fact that we're from the same territory." Jian Wuji smiled and didn't say anything. Right at this moment, a cold and gorgeous woman in a blue dress that led the group from the Flower Palace had suddenly stepped forward, and she glanced at Jian Wuji before she gazed at Yuan Xiu and said, "Yuan Xiu, Yang Yi is the son of a traitor from my Flower Palace. So, his life should be taken by my Flower Palace. What do you think?" "Oh!" Yuan Xiu laughed coldly, and then he said, "Yan Wu, Yang Yi has attained the enlightened sword heart and comprehended 4th level sword intent. Moreover, he even possesses a mysterious king rank dark beast. If you try to take his life, then don't get killed by him in the end, because that would really bring extraordinary shame to your Flower Palace." A wisp of ridicule arose on the corners of her mouth as she said, "Killed by him? So what if he possesses the enlightened sword heart? So what if he has comprehended sword intent? He's merely a first heaven realm profounder. Can he surmount a realm to do battle with me? Does he even possess the qualifications to accomplish that? I'm not a disciple of your Origin School." As she spoke, she glanced at Yuan Tong. Yuan Tong's expression was gloomy, but he didn't say anything. Indeed, the defeated had no right to speak at most times. Yuan Xiu glanced at Yuan Tong, and then he retaliated. "Even though my Origin School's Yuan Tong was defeated, he was defeated after trying his best. On the other hand, your Flower Palace surrendered without a fight. If it's in terms of being humiliating, then it's probably your Flower Palace that takes the cake, right?" Right when Yan Wu was about to flare up, a woman from the Snow Palace that wore a white dress suddenly walked forward, and then she glanced indifferently at both Yuan Xiu and Yan Wu before she said, "Both of you make it sound like Yang Yi is someone both of you can squash at any time. If he attains the king realm, then just the enlightened sword heart he possesses would be sufficient for him to remain in an invincible state. How would the two of you kill him? How truly laughable." As soon as she finished speaking, she didn't say anything else before she led all the disciples of the Snow Palace onto the teleportation platform, and then they vanished from it. Yuan Xiu and Yan Wu had slightly unsightly expressions. They wanted to retort yet were unable to do so, because the woman from the Snow Palace was right. Besides the martial god of legend, there was practically no one at the same realm of cultivation who could suppress one who'd attained the enlightened sword heart. However, the person in the southern territory that was most likely to become the martial god had been defeated at Yang Yi's hand. So if Yang Yi were to enter the king realm, then could anyone in the king realm be a match for him? Yang Yi must be eliminated before he enters the king realm. At this moment, Yuan Xiu and Yan Wu had a moment of extreme tacit understanding as they simultaneously thought of the same thing. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something, and Yuan Xiu looked towards the place where the disciples of the Ghost Sect stood and said, "The Ghost Sect's Xianxia has enmity with Yang Yi because of the death of his brother. Why hasn't he come here yet?" The disciples of the Ghost Sect didn't dare ignore Yuan Xiu's question, and a disciple of the Ghost Sect said, "My Ghost Sect received news that Yang Yi has headed to the ancient battlefield by himself yesterday, so senior brother Xianxia has gone off in pursuit of him. Yang Yi intends to traverse the Grand Myriad Mountains to head to the ancient battlefield? Asked Yen Wu with a frown on her face. That disciple of the Ghost Sect nodded and said, "According to the information obtained by my Ghost Sect, that's exactly what he intends to do. Why is he exhausting such an effort to head to the ancient battlefield?" Yuan Xiu spoke in a low voice. After a short while, he seemed to have thought of something and sneered. "Could it be that he's afraid of us? So, he didn't hesitate to traverse the Grand Myriad Mountains and travel to the ancient battlefield by himself." "Perhaps," Yen Wu said in agreement. "Besides the Grand Qin Empire, he has offended 5 out of the 6 great powers. So, he's definitely aware that he wouldn't be able to live past today if he came here. Thus, he chose to travel to the ancient battlefield by himself. This Yang Yi is pretty smart." Yuan Xiu spoke in a cold voice. "Humph. It doesn't matter anymore because he still wouldn't be able to live for a few more days. With the strength and insane disposition Li Xianhe possesses, the Grand Myriad Mountains will be his grave. After all, Li Xianhe is already at the 7th rank of the King Realm, and he's even an existence that fought his way out of the Azura Purgatory of the Ghost Sect. It's definitely impossible for Yang Yi to surmount a realm of cultivation and challenge him. He's really getting off lightly by being able to die just like that." Yen Wu grunted coldly. "Don't worry, with how cruel and bloodthirsty Li Xianhe is, he wouldn't allow Yang Yi to die so quickly," said Yuan Xiu. "That's true," Yen Wu agreed. When Wenrenyu and Morongyao heard the conversation between Yen Wu and Yuan Xiu, a wisp of worry had simultaneously appeared in their eyes. It was extremely normal for geniuses to be able to surmount realms of cultivation to do battle, because even they could accomplish it. However, this was towards a profounder that wasn't a monstrous genius as well. Just like them, it was probably impossible to find a profounder at the mortal realm who could defeat them. The difference in cultivation realms was extremely important when it came to a battle between monstrous geniuses. Yang Yi had once relied on the might of a Dao artifact to defeat Yuan Tong, who was at the half-step king realm. Yet now, Li Xianhe wasn't at the half-step king realm but a true king realm expert. Moreover, Li Xianhe had attained the 7th rank of the king realm. So, could Yang Yi survive Li Xianhe? At the moment that all the geniuses and elite disciples of the Southern Territory had headed to the ancient battlefield, Yang Yi was already in the Grand Myriad Mountains, and he was riding Gray that was dashing through a plain. The reason he hadn't taken the teleportation formation to the ancient battlefield was that he'd noticed that the little fellow was about to awaken. For the sake of avoiding any mishaps, he'd chosen to traverse the Grand Myriad Mountains and head to the ancient battlefield. On the other hand, the reason he hadn't chosen to ride the Lightning Eagle was that he could practice his sword techniques while he traveled by land. 3 days later, Yang Ye's eyes were slightly closed, and the profound energy within his body circulated as he rode on Gray's back. Just like this, 6 hours had passed. At a certain moment in time, Yang Yi suddenly opened his eyes, and at the instant that this happened, an enormous rock over 30 m ahead had suddenly and mysteriously exploded into pieces, causing rubble to fly towards the surroundings. As he thought back to how the rock had exploded into pieces, the corners of Yang Ye's mouth curled up slightly to reveal a slight smile. Since the beginning, he'd seemed to have forgotten what Elder Mu had once told him. The sword control technique stressed upon speed. Yet he'd unconsciously started to pursue usage of it that was magnificent and elegant. For example, during the battle with Yuan Tong on the arena. Even though the scene of him commanding a myriad of swords was extremely magnificent and the imposing aura they revealed was extraordinarily terrifying, the destructive might they possessed was very weak. Moreover, it exhausted a great deal of profound energy. The combination of the hidden sword and sword control technique was still extremely terrifying. If he was able to cultivate the sword control technique to the point it conformed to Elder Mu's requirements of traveling 300 m in an instant, then it would be extremely likely for him to be able to instantly annihilate Yuan Tong if he was able to take Yuan Tong by surprise. Besides the sword control technique, he'd bitterly cultivated the clone illusion technique he'd obtained from Yuan Yi and the Dragon Breaker technique. Both of them were extremely useful to him right now, especially the Dragon Breaker, because its might was truly extremely formidable. After all, He'd overcome Lin Shiran's infinite flash sword with the Dragonbreaker technique that was at the first level. The Dragonbreaker technique had 3 levels. With the physical body he possessed in the past, Yang Yi was unable to cultivate the second level. However, now that his physical body had been tempered by the nether ghost flames, he'd attained the qualifications to cultivate the second level of the Dragonbreaker technique. Yang Yi didn't dare be careless at all during his trip to the ancient battlefield. After all, it was where all the monstrous geniuses of Profounder Continent would be gathering, and he would never think that he was already the #1 expert amongst the younger generation of Profounder Continent. It was good to be confident, but if one was conceited, then one would be courting death. Yang Yi wasn't a conceited person. Right at this moment, Yang Yi seemed to have noticed something, and his pupils suddenly constricted. Right when he was about to act, a dagger that flickered with a ghastly cold glow had struck his neck. At the same time, a pitch-black figure that seemed like a shadow had actually suddenly appeared on Gray's back, and right in front of Yang Yi. Clang! The dagger struck Yang Yi's neck, but his head didn't leave his body. Conversely, the dagger shook slightly, and the black figure was stunned. Obviously, the figure hadn't imagined that this would be the outcome. Right when the figure was about to launch another attack, Yang Yi had directly smashed his fist towards the black figure's face. The black figure didn't dare allow Yang Yi's fist to hit, and the black figure utilized the dagger to block the attack. Bang! The black figure was instantly blasted flying by the enormous force that Yang Yi's fist carried. Yang Yi stopped and gazed at the black figure that was 10 m away. Earlier, he felt a wave of fear after suffering the black figure's attack as well, because this person's movement technique was truly too terrifying. If his physical body hadn't been strengthened again with Elder Mu's help, then the strike from before would have taken his head. I never expected that your physical body would already be terrifying to such an extent. The black figure was the first to speak and had a clear and melodious voice. It was the voice of a woman. "It's you." Yang Yi spoke in a low voice when he heard the black figure speak. This figure was none other than the mysterious female assassin who'd pursued him through the Grand Myriad Mountains some time ago. She didn't answer him. She remained silent for a short while before she suddenly said, "You're in an extremely dangerous situation." Yang Yi was stunned, and then he frowned and said, "What do you mean?" The Grand Qin Empire, Origin School, Flower Palace, Ghost Sect, and Sword Sect have contacted the League of Doom in secret, and they have a sole objective, to kill you. The female assassin spoke in a low voice. The Grand Qin Empire? The Sword Sect? Yang Yi laughed coldly and said, "They want to kill me? Why should I believe you? Moreover, it seems like you intended to kill me just now, right? If it was the Flower Palace, the Origin School, and the Ghost Sect, then Yang Yi would believe it. He would even slightly believe that the Sword Sect wanted to kill him because the Sword Sect's Taoist Zue and Yu Heng were truly not good people. However, he didn't really believe that the Grand Qin Empire wanted to kill him. After all, the founding emperor had just paid an extremely huge price to protect him, so why would the founding emperor try to kill him right after that? Unless the founding ancestor had gone mad. The assassin said, "You must understand that the experts at the spirit realm and above are prohibited from entering the ancient battlefield. Even though spirit realm experts do exist there, certain reasons make them unable to make a move against the geniuses of the various territories. In other words, the ancient battlefield belongs to King Realm experts. Yet you Yang Yi are the quasi-sword emperor and possess the enlightened sword heart. Once you advance into the King Realm, then based on the relationship you possess with the 6 great powers, it would undoubtedly be a calamity for their disciples. So, they had to eliminate you, and now is the best time. Of course, they wouldn't allow you to continue growing even without this reason. You ought to understand the saying, 'Those that aren't under my command should be eliminated.'" Yang Yi fell silent because the woman really made sense. With the relationship he had with the Origin School, Flower Palace, Ghost Sect, and the Sword Sect, those extraordinary powers would definitely not allow Yang Yi to grow. Even though the founding ancestor had included him under the protection of the Grand Qin Empire, while they couldn't do anything openly, wouldn't they still try to take his life in secret? After a moment of deep thought, Yang Yi looked at her and said, Why did you tell this to me? There isn't any relationship between us, right? The woman fell silent for a short while before she said, some hope for your death while others hope that you live. I'm from the side that doesn't wish for you to die. When she spoke up to hear, she paused for a moment before she continued. Allow me to give you one last warning. Don't think that you're the strongest in the younger generation of the Southern Territory just because you defeated Yuan Tong and obtained the first position on the Ascension rankings. Not to mention the entire profounder continent, just the Southern Territory has numerous geniuses that keep really low profiles. It wasn't a lack of strength that made them not participate in the Ascension rankings, and it was because their objective was the Hidden Dragon Pagoda instead. Yang Yi shook his head and said, I've never thought that I'm the strongest in the younger generation of the Southern Territory. In my opinion, the strongest in the younger generation of the Southern Territory or the stronger in the younger generation of Profounder Continent are both quite meaningless. Because we're all weaklings before true experts like experts at the Exalt Realm and Monarch Realm. That's for the best, said the assassin. Yang Yi suddenly asked, who doesn't want me to die? I'm unable to tell you that, said the assassin. Yang Yi remained silent for a moment before he nodded and said, since you're from the side that doesn't want me dead, then why did you launch a surprise attack against me just now? She said indifferently. If you weren't even able to withstand an assassination attempt from me, then there's no need for you to head to the ancient battlefield, and you should just look for a place to hide and stay alive. What you mean is that the League of Doom has sent assassins that are even stronger than you? Yang Yi frowned as he spoke. She nodded and said, they've dispatched blood assassins at the King Realm. Moreover, they've dispatched more than one. 3 blood assassins targeting a single profounder at the First Heaven Realm. This is something that has never occurred in the history of the blood assassins. Yang Yi couldn't help but laugh bitterly when he heard this. The League of Doom really thinks highly of me. If it was a head-on battle, then Yang Yi, who possessed the Dark Beast army, would truly not be afraid of those blood assassins while he was in the Grand Myriad Mountains. However, the problem was they wouldn't fight him head-on. He was truly not confident in his ability to deal with these assassins while the little fellow wasn't by his side. Just like the previous attack from this female assassin. If her strength was just a little stronger, then even if he was able to avoid death, he would have probably been injured. Good luck. She spoke indifferently and intended to leave. Wait. Yang Yi stopped her. She turned around to gaze at him before she said, what? You're heading to the ancient battlefield? Asked Yang Yi. She nodded and said, the League of Doom will naturally be participating in such a grand event. Moreover, how could the League of Doom give up on the opportunity to fight for karmic luck in the Hidden Dragon Pagoda? Yang Yi pondered deeply for a moment before he said, no matter what, thank you for notifying me. Even though this woman had tried to assassinate him on many occasions, her actions this time were undoubtedly comparable to saving his life this time. After all, if he hadn't taken any precautions when so many King Realm assassins came to assassinate him, and coupled with the fact that the little fellow hadn't woken up from its cultivation, then Yang Yi would probably be in grave danger. So, it wasn't going too far to say that it was equivalent to saving his life. The woman was stunned. Obviously, she hadn't expected that Yang Yi would thank her. After all, she'd almost killed him on many occasions. After a moment of deep thought, she said, you don't have to thank me. It was someone else who wanted to notify you about this. If I'm not wrong, then they've already arrived at the Grand Myriad Mountains. Good luck. As soon as she finished speaking, she didn't stay here any longer, and her figure shook before she vanished mysteriously on the spot. After the woman left, Yang Yi took a deep breath before he grinned. He could avoid those assassins because all he had to do was summon the Lightning Eagle. After all, it was impossible for them to try and assassinate him while he was in the air. However, he refused to do that because only life and death battle would allow his strength and combat instinct to obtain an obvious improvement. Yang Yi was aware of his flaws, and it was that his combat instinct was too weak. Just like during the attack he suffered just now. If it was Yuan Tong who was the target of that woman's attack just now, then Yuan Tong would have definitely been able to rely on his combat instinct to avoid the attack. However, He was unable to do so and could only rely on his formidable physical body to resist it by force. Even though he still hadn't arrived at the ancient battlefield, based on the information he'd obtained from Elder Mu and the founding emperor, the youths who gathered there would definitely be extremely monstrous geniuses. So he couldn't be careless at all. Moreover, he still had to look for the ninth hell-cold gale. Thus, there was no time to be lost on his path towards improving his strength. Xianxia let out a light breath of air before he placed Gray into the tiny vortex. After that, he dashed swiftly towards the depths of the Grand Myriad Mountains, because he didn't want Gray to become a target of those assassins. In a deathly silent forest, a shadow that was completely pitch black suddenly walked out from within a large tree. The black figure gradually took 2 steps forward before it squatted down and stretched out a hand to lightly touch the leaves on the ground. After a short while, the black figure frowned and said, "Why has Xianxia's aura vanished here? Could it be that he can travel through the ground?" The black figure had just finished speaking when his pupils constricted abruptly, and then his figure shook before it vanished mysteriously on the spot and appeared 10 m away. However, when he appeared 10 m away, a light blood-red mark had appeared on his neck. On a tree that was densely covered in leaves, Xianxia shook his head with regret when he saw the combination of the hidden sword and sword control technique had failed. And then he didn't stay here for another moment and flashed towards the distance. At such a close distance, the black figure had still been able to avoid his surprise attack, and this clearly showed how terrifying the strength of that King Realm assassin was. In any case, he wasn't able to go against such an opponent right now. Moreover, the assassin had 2 more companions, so he hadn't hesitated at all to retreat. He wanted to summon the army of dark beasts and surround the assassin. However, when he thought about the strange movement technique the assassin possessed, he'd given up on this thought. The Dark Beast army was utterly useless without the little fellow, because if the assassin was determined to flee, then both the Dark Beast army and Xianxia himself would be unable to do anything but watch helplessly. As he watched Xianxia vanish from his field of vision, the black figure didn't pursue Xianxia. He just stood silently on the spot. After a short while, he stretched out his hand and rubbed the blood-red mark on his neck, and a wisp of a solemn expression flashed in his eyes. Right at this moment, 2 black figures that were similarly enveloped beneath black clothes had appeared at both his left and right. When they saw the blood-red mark on his neck, the black figure on the right laughed coldly and said, "Lung Yin, I never expected that you would actually be injured by a profounder at the first heaven realm. What a shame." The other black figure glanced at the black figure on the right who'd ridiculed Lung Yin and said, "Lung Feng, it isn't the time to fight amongst us. Even though the high-ups sent the 3 of us to assassinate a first heaven realm profounder and were all displeased by this decision, you have to understand that everything would be fine if we succeed. However, if we fail, then we'll probably be unable to hold our heads up high in the league anymore." "Fail?" A wisp of disdain appeared on the corners of Lung Feng's mouth, and he said, "The assassination of a first heaven realm profounder would fail? Lung Feng, you think too highly of Xianxia. So what if he's the first on the ascension rankings and possesses both sword intent and the enlightened sword heart? It's all useless before me. There's no need for both of you to continue pursuing him. I alone am sufficient." As soon as he finished speaking, his figure flashed and vanished on the spot. Lung Jun shook his head when he saw Lung Feng leave, and then he gazed at Lung Yin and said, "What exactly happened? How were you injured by him?" Lung Yin chuckled and said, "Lung Jun, no wonder your rate of success has been the highest amongst the blood assassins for so many years. I didn't quite understand it in the past because the strengths that you, Lung Feng, and I possess are almost equal. However, you've practically never failed a single assignment, whereas Lung Feng and I were unable to accomplish such a feat. Now, I finally understand a little. It's because of your attitude. You're able to be so cautious even when you're facing a profounder at the first heaven realm. And it's exactly this attitude that both Lung Feng and I are inferior to." Lung Jun said indifferently, "He isn't an ordinary first heaven realm profounder. He possesses 4th level sword intent, the enlightened sword heart, and a physical body comparable to a king rank dark beast. Moreover, he's even able to utilize a Dao artifact. I don't dare underestimate such strength." He really shouldn't be underestimated. Lang Yi nodded slightly, and then he said, "Earlier, I'd almost perished because I underestimated him, as expected of the first on the Ascension rankings, as expected of the future Sword Emperor of the Southern Territory." Leng Jun suddenly asked, "How did he injure you?" Lang Yin smiled mysteriously yet didn't speak a single word before his figure flashed and vanished on the spot. A wisp of a gloomy expression flashed in Leng Jun's eyes when he saw Lang Yin leave, and then he grunted coldly before he vanished on the spot as well. Yang Ye's figure was ceaselessly flickering through the boundless ocean of trees. He was naturally not just fleeing. When facing these assassins, he had to find a suitable opportunity to make a move against them. Otherwise, with the shocking movement technique and various assassination techniques possessed by these assassins, then not to mention killing them, even surviving would be a problem for him. Suddenly, Yang Yi stopped moving. He glanced at the surroundings before he nodded lightly. The spot he stood just happened to be a spot that could be utilized to launch a surprise attack. Because he was surrounded by dense rank grass, and the rank grass was over 3 m tall. So, not to mention a single person, even 10 people would be impossible to notice while they hid amongst the rank grass. After pondering deeply for a moment on the spot, Yang Yi flipped his palm, and the sword chest appeared on his palm. With a command in his heart, the 36 swords transformed into rays of light that shot out from within the sword chest and entered amidst the rank grass. After a moment of hesitation, Yang Yi flicked his finger, and then a sword floated in front of him. Moreover, the high-rank technique talisman that Bauer had given him the other day had appeared along with this sword. With a command in his heart, the sword carried the technique talisman along as it flew into the dense leaves above him. After he finished doing all of this, Yang Yi flashed into the rank grass, and then he restrained his aura and fell completely silent. When facing a King Realm assassin, which was one of the elite assassins of the League of Doom, he didn't dare be careless or underestimate his opponents in the slightest. So, he could be said to have utilized all his trump cards for the sake of killing one of these assassins. Of course, if 2 or 3 of them appeared at once, then he would turn around and flee without the slightest hesitation. With the high-grade Strider talismans he possessed, no matter how shocking their movements techniques were, it would still be quite difficult for them to catch up to him. After 2 hours passed by, no one had made an appearance. So Yang Yi continued maintaining the posture of a statue with his aura completely restrained and his eyes closed slightly. In next to no time, 4 hours had passed, 6 hours had passed. However, not a single person had appeared here. Just like this, an entire day had gone by. Yang Yi opened his eyes from amidst the rank grass, and he glanced towards the surroundings through the gaps between the grass. He noticed that the surroundings were deathly silent and completely calm. Yang Yi frowned but didn't move at all because his intuition told him that the quieter it was, the more irregular the situation was. Time slowly trickled by, and another day had passed. Yang Yi was slightly impatient as he resided amongst the rank grass. However, he still didn't move. At this moment, he was very puzzled because he hadn't concealed his aura all along the way. Moreover, not only that, he'd even left some traces behind on purpose. Logically speaking, they should have caught up by now. But why has there been no sign of anyone for 2 days now? Could it be that those assassins have given up on pursuing me? Or they're already here, and they're waiting for me to show myself just like I'm waiting for them to show themselves? When he thought up to here, the corners of Yang Ye's mouth had curled up slightly to form a strange smile. With a command in his heart, a sword that was hidden before a rock around 15 m away from Yang Yi had suddenly moved lightly and severed a few blades of grass. Right at this moment, an unexpected event occurred. A black shadow suddenly emerged from within an enormous tree, and the black figure shot towards the location of the sword with extremely swift speed. In the shadows, Yang Yi was delighted when he witnessed this scene, and then a wisp of a ruthless expression flashed in his eyes. With a command in his heart, the 36 swords shot into the air and instantly surrounded the black figure, and then they transformed into 36 rays of light that shot explosively towards the black figure. Yang Yi hadn't held back this time, and his 4th-level sword intent covered the heavens and the earth as it enveloped down towards the black figure. At the same time, he swiftly stomped his right foot on the ground, and he relied on the counterforce to shoot forward explosively like a cannonball. Lung Feng's expression changed violently when he witnessed this scene. At this moment, he was naturally aware that he'd fallen into a trap. Of course, this wasn't the reason that his expression had changed, and it was because of the speed and strength possessed by the 36 swords instead. The speed of the swords was swift to the point he wasn't able to dodge them at all. Moreover, even he had no choice but to fear the terrifying force contained within the swords that were enhanced by Yang Ye's 4th-level sword intent. When he'd first arrived here, the experience he'd accumulated through many years of serving as an assassin had told him that there was something wrong with this place, because it was too quiet. When he recalled the blood-red mark on Lang Yin's neck, he decided to be cautious in the end, and he didn't move around to search for Yang Yi. However, after waiting for so long, even he was slightly impatient, and right when he was about to make a move, he suddenly noticed movement from the grass at the side. When he witnessed this scene, the first thought in his mind was that Yang Yi was unable to persist. After all, Yang Yi wasn't an assassin, so how could Yang Yi possess the patience that he possessed? Thus, he hadn't hesitated to make a move, and then tragedy fell upon him. He didn't even have the time to think before he twisted his wrist, and the dagger in his hand emanated a cold glow as it shot towards Yang Yi, who was charging towards him. On the other hand, he stomped the ground with both his feet and rose into the air. It wasn't that he didn't dare to go head-on with the might contained by those 36 swords, and it was instead because there was no reason. Fleeing immediately upon failure. A smart assassin wouldn't go head-on with the target. A wisp of a cold smile suffused the corners of Yang Ye's mouth when he saw the black figure dodging upwards. With a command in his heart, the sword that was hidden above instantly transformed into a ray of light that shot directly downward. Moreover, the high-rank technique talisman was descending along with the sword. In midair, the technique talisman expanded in midair, and then it instantly transformed into a crescent-shaped blade of wind. After the blade of wind appeared, the large trees in an area of over 10 m in the surroundings had been instantly transformed into innumerable pieces, while the blades of rank grass below were immediately transformed into bits. Lung Feng's eyes were filled with horror when he saw the blade of wind descend abruptly. Never had he imagined that Yang Yi actually possessed a high-rank technique talisman or that Yang Yi would utilize it in such a manner. It had caused him to be unable to evade now even if he wanted to. The blade of wind resided above him while the sword formation that carried terrifying strength had surrounded him. Lung Feng was terrified. Fortunately, he wasn't terrified to the point of losing his mind. He took a deep breath while a wisp of a resolute expression flashed in his eyes. The profound energy within his body surged out, and he forcefully stabbed the dagger in his hand at the blade of wind. Bang! The blade of wind collided with Lung Feng, and then Lung Feng instantly fell swiftly from midair. Yang Yi was delighted when he witnessed this scene. Right when he was about to strike the final blow, a dagger suddenly appeared at his neck, and then the hairs on Yang Ye's entire body instantly stood on end. Clang! The dagger swept past Yang Ye's neck. However, it was like the dagger had struck hard metal, and it emanated the resounding sound of metal colliding with each other. Lung Jun, who held the dagger, was stunned. Obviously, he hadn't imagined that Yang Ye's physical body would actually be strong to such a terrifying extent. In next to no time, he recovered from his shock, and he didn't hesitate to vanish mysteriously on the spot. In the next moment, he'd appeared over 10 m away. Yang Yi had an extremely solemn expression as he watched the black figure vanish from his field of vision. Earlier, if it wasn't for the strength of his physical body, then he would have probably become a headless corpse by now. Perhaps the combat ability of these King Realm assassins wasn't very terrifying. However, he had no choice but to fear their ability when it came to techniques of assassination. Just like the moment that assassin had chosen just now. That moment was exactly the moment where Yang Yi had let his guard down and was the most relaxed. Yet it was exactly this subtle instant that had been accurately grasped by that assassin. Yang Yi took a deep breath and started to become serious. Presently, the assassins were aware that his physical body was formidable, so they would definitely go all out when they attacked next. Of course, he wasn't afraid of them. He was just truly unwilling for what happened earlier to repeat itself and suffer an attack, yet have no choice but to just watch as the enemy left. Such a feeling was truly extremely aggrieving. Yang Yi shook his head, and then he walked slowly towards Lung Feng, who'd been stabbed by the 36 swords to the point he seemed like a porcupine. As Yang Yi gazed at Lung Feng's corpse, he issued a command in his heart, and the 36 swords instantly flew back into the sword chest. After that, Yang Yi gestured with his right hand, and the spatial ring on Lung Feng's index finger flew into his palm. Yang Yi shook his head after he took a glance at the content of the spatial ring, and then a wisp of disappointment flashed in his eyes. Besides over 1,000 energy stones, there was nothing else within the spatial ring. Are all of these assassins so poor? Yang Yi glanced at Lung Feng's corpse with disdain, and then he intended to leave. However, right at this moment, his gaze had inadvertently descended onto a red iron token on Lung Feng's waist. After a moment of hesitation, Yang Yi gestured with his right hand, and the red iron token flew into his palm. When he focused his gaze onto the iron token, he noticed that a single scarlet red character that represented blood was inscribed on the front of the token. After pondering for a moment, Yang Yi had roughly guessed what it was. It was probably a form of identification in the League of Doom. Yang Yi hesitated for a moment before he placed the iron token into his spatial ring because he felt that he might have a use for it in the future. After he finished doing all of this, Yang Yi didn't stay here any longer, and he flashed towards the depths of the Grand Myriad Mountains. After around 15 minutes later, Lung Jun suddenly appeared where Yang Yi stood just now. He glanced at the direction that Yang Yi had left towards before he glanced at Lung Feng's corpse, and he had an extremely solemn expression in his eyes. Earlier, he'd already arrived here when Lung Feng clashed with Yang Yi, but he hadn't made a move because he was waiting for the best opportunity. In the end, he'd found the best opportunity just as he'd wished. However, he'd never imagined that Yang Ye's physical body was actually strong to such a terrifying extent, and it was even harder than iron. Right at this moment, Lung Yin suddenly appeared by Lung Jun's side. He glanced at Lung Feng's corpse before he frowned, and then he gazed at Lung Jun and said, "You fought him?" Lung Jun nodded and said, "You were right. Yang Yi really does deserve to be the first on the ascension rankings. His strength is utterly not inferior to an ordinary King Realm expert. Besides the fact that he was careless and had underestimated Yang Yi, Yang Ye's own strength was the main reason for Lung Feng's death. No wonder the higher-ups sent all three of us to carry out this assignment." "His strength is formidable?" Lung Yin chuckled and said, "That's great. I haven't encountered such an interesting target for many years. Do you know? At the moment Is was injured by him that day, that feeling of excitement returned to me once more. The higher-ups promised that we would be able to become Earth assassins in advance if we're able to kill him. But now, even if the higher-ups give up on assassinating him, I would still not give up on assassinating him." Lung Jun glanced indifferently at Lung Yin, and then he said, "I hope you're fully satisfied with the excitement you get from this assassination." As soon as he finished speaking, Lung Jun's figure shook and vanished on the spot. Lung Yin grunted coldly, and then he didn't stay here any longer. His figure flashed towards the distance. Yang Yi was riding gray swiftly through a plain. All along the way, he'd been maintaining a high level of vigilance at all times. However, he was slightly depressed because the other two assassins hadn't made another appearance for the last 2 days. However, Yang Yi was sure that they were very close time, and perhaps they were keeping an eye on him from somewhere while waiting for a suitable opportunity to launch a lethal attack. It was exactly because of this reason that he hadn't set up another trap for them throughout these past 2 days. Now, the first thing he had to do wasn't to try and kill them, and it was to escape them and blend into the shadows. Because only in this way would he have an opportunity to kill them. Otherwise, with the strange movement technique they possessed, it would be useless even if he summoned all of the king-rank dark beasts he had. On the other hand, if he wanted to escape them and blend into the shadows, then he had no choice but to summon Gray. With Gray as his means of travel, Yang Yi rode Gray for 2 more days before he intended to start his counterattack. However, right at this moment, the sound of battle suddenly resounded from afar, and it caused Yang Yi to frown. Yang Yi immediately decided to abandon his plans to set up an ambush, and then he placed Gray back into the tiny vortex before he flashed forward. Since there were sounds of battle, then it would definitely be impossible to ambush those two assassins because the assassins would definitely take precautions if they heard the sound of battle. However, Yang Yi was still slightly puzzled because while this place wasn't the depths of the Grand Myriad Mountains, it was at the border of the inner area of the Grand Myriad Mountains. The reason he was able to arrive here was that Gray had led the way, and this place could be said to belong to the Dark Beasts. If humans were to attack Dark Beasts here, then it would be no different than courting death. On a hill, two women were standing back to back with swords in their hands while 20 king-rank flame-roar lions and the corpses of other flame-roar lions covered the ground. When Yang Yi arrived here and saw the corpses that covered the ground, he was instantly astounded. He was clearly aware of the strength possessed by these flame-roar lions, yet these two women were actually able to annihilate so many. After all, these two women were merely at the first rank of the king realm. Yang Yi started to size them up. Both of them were around the age of 20 and had pretty appearances. Especially the woman on the left, she possessed a pair of slender and fair legs, a figure that was neither thin nor fat, and while her appearance couldn't be considered to be peerless, it possessed a charm or its own, especially when she was encircled by those dark beasts. The faint smile that hung on her face added a little more charm to her. On the other hand, the woman on the right was slightly chubby. Her face was round yet hadn't affected her beauty, especially the pair of large eyes she possessed. They were extremely bright and beautiful to the point of being unforgettable. In any case, in Yang Ye's opinion, this woman was the first woman he'd seen that possessed such a figure yet was still pretty. However, the woman's expression was the complete opposite of the faint smile that hung on the face of the woman on the left. At this moment, her expression was solemn while her bright and beautiful eyes flashed with a wisp of worry from time to time. Wei Wei, what should we do? More and more members of this lion pack are arriving as we kill them. We're utterly unable to annihilate them. Once the profound energy within our bodies is exhausted, then this damnable place will be our grave. I don't want to die, nor do I want to become the food of these animals. The slightly chubby woman spoke with slight anxiousness. The woman called Wei Wei grinned and said, "Don't worry, Yin Yin, with Big Sister here. You don't have to worry no matter how many flame-roar lions there are." As soon as she finished speaking, she tapped the tip of her toe on the ground, and then her figure shot forward. When she'd shot 3m forward, she suddenly tapped the ground lightly once more, and then her figure spun on the spot. At the same time, the sword in her hand swept out in an extremely natural manner. In an instant, a snow-white strand of sword chi took the form of a crescent as it shot explosively towards 6 king-rank flame-roar lions that were standing in front of her. Because they were too huge, they were utterly unable to evade this strand of sword chi, and the sword chi collided with them after that. Hissing sounds erupted as the 6 king-rank dark beasts were instantly transformed into 12 pieces under Yang Ye's astounded gaze. She'd instantly annihilated 6 king-rank dark beasts with a single strike. Of course, Yang Yi was even more shocked because the woman had actually comprehended sword intent. Moreover, it was even 3rd-level sword intent. "Darling, you're amazing." Meanwhile, the woman called Yan Yan suddenly cried out loudly, and then she ran to the woman called Wei Wei before forcefully embracing her. Moreover, she even pecked Wei Wei's cheek. This scene instantly stunned Yang Yi, who was hiding in the shadows. Wei Wei blushed. Right when she was about to say something, the flame-roar lions in the surroundings had suddenly roared furiously, and then they pounced ferociously at the two women. Obviously, her actions had infuriated these king-rank dark beasts. Besides that, the entire ground had started to tremble lightly. After that, countless flame-roar lions suddenly appeared in the distance, and then they swarmed towards the two women. Both their expressions changed when they witnessed this scene. Even though they possessed extremely formidable strengths, not to mention them, even a spirit realm expert would have no choice but to retreat temporarily when facing such a huge swarm of dark beasts. Wei Wei hesitated for a moment before she decisively grabbed the woman by her side who'd been completely scared stiff, and then she leaped up. At the instant she leaped up, A pair of pure white wings that were formed from profound energy had appeared on her shoulder. Right at this moment, a wisp of hesitation flashed in her eyes again, and then she sighed lightly. After that, her figure flashed, and in a few breaths of time, she descended onto the spot where Yang Yi was hidden. Yang Yi was stunned when he saw the woman come over abruptly. What does she intend to do? Right when he was puzzled, the woman called Wei Wei had suddenly grabbed his shoulder, and then she soared into the sky and flashed towards the distance. Yang Yi gazed at the dense expanse of dark beasts on the ground below before he glanced at the woman by his side. And then he blinked. This woman is rescuing me? Why is she rescuing me? Could it be that I've encountered a kind-hearted person that only exists in stories? Of course, there was another important question. When did this woman notice him, and why was she able to notice him? Are you a profounder of the Southern Territory? Right when Yang Yi was puzzled, the woman who held his arm had suddenly asked this question. Yang Yi returned to his senses, and then he nodded. Right when he was about to say something, the slightly chubby woman suddenly said with annoyance, "A first heaven realm profounder actually dares to come to the interior of the Grand Myriad Mountains. If my darling wasn't kind-hearted, then you would have become food for those large fellows beneath us." Yang Yi grinned and said, "Both of you are probably not from the Southern Territory, right? How did you know that?" The slightly chubby woman spoke with astonishment. When she heard the slightly chubby woman, the woman by her side who was called Wei Wei glanced at the slightly chubby woman before she shook her head helplessly. This fool. Yang Yi frowned slightly. He was merely probing them, but he'd never expected that they really weren't from the Southern Territory. If he wasn't wrong, then they had probably come to fight for karmic luck at the Hidden Dragon Pagoda. But why would they have made an appearance in the Grand Myriad Mountains? Hey, you still haven't answered me. How did you know that we aren't from the Southern Territory? The slightly chubby woman was slightly annoyed when she saw Yang Yi remaining silent. Yang Yi returned to his senses, and then he grinned and said, "I guessed. You." The slightly chubby woman clearly didn't believe him, and she instantly glared at him. "All right, let's first think about how we should escape." Right at this moment, Wei Wei, who was holding on to Yang Yi, and the slightly chubby woman glanced at the flame-roar lions that densely covered the ground below as she spoke in a low voice. When she saw the dense expanse of flame-roar lions that were pursuing the three of them from the below, the slightly chubby woman's round face had instantly turned slightly ghastly pale. She wasn't afraid of death, but she was afraid of being eaten alive by those dark beasts. It was fine if her head was the first to be eaten because she would die instantly and wouldn't feel any pain. However, if they ate any other part of her like her hands or legs, then just thinking about it caused her face to grow even paler. As he gazed at the dense expanse of dark beasts below them, Yang Yi frowned as well. If the little fellow was here, then he naturally didn't have to fear these dark beasts. But the problem was that the little fellow wasn't able to help him right now. It was undoubtedly impossible for him to deter these flame-roar lions by relying on Grey. The Dark Beast Empire respected the strong. No matter if it was in terms of bloodline or strength, Grey was much more inferior to the flame-roar lions. Moreover, the flame-roar lions had formed an entire swarm. So, he would still be courting death even if he summoned Grey. "Wei Wei, fly quickly. I don't want to be eaten alive." The slightly chubby woman spoke with a slightly trembling voice. Wei Wei shook her head and said, "This technique that transformed profound energy into wings exhausts an extremely huge amount of profound energy, and I don't have much left within me. My profound energy will dry up in 2 hours at most. At that time, we'll probably really become their food. So it's a technique." Yang Yi was enlightened when he heard her. In the beginning, he was extremely puzzled and bewildered when he saw that pair of wings appear. After all, it was something that only spirit realm experts could accomplish. "Hey, do you have any way out of this?" Right when Yang Yi was in deep through, the round-faced woman suddenly gazed at him and said, "Since you dared to come here on your own, you definitely have something to rely on, right? If you really have some sort of technique that can save us, then stop hiding it." Wei Wei turned her head to gaze at Yang Yi. Obviously, she felt that the round-faced woman made sense. Yang Yi remained silent. He really did have a way out of this predicament because he just had to summon the lightning eagle and he could escape the flame roar lions beneath them. However, he truly didn't want to expose the lightning eagle before those assassins who were hiding in the shadows. If outsiders found out that he, Yang Yi, even possessed a flying dark beasts, then he would probably be unable to rest in peace forever. Of course, this wasn't the main point. The main point was that if he summoned the lightning eagle, then he would have to do it in front of these two women. Not only would such an action be world-shocking, but it was also very likely that the mysterious tiny vortex would be exposed. So, Yang Yi shook his head before their gazes of anticipation. Right when he was about to say something, the slightly chubby woman had suddenly burst into tears, and she hugged Wei Wei tightly as she cried, "Wei Wei, I don't want to die. I still want to become an inner court disciple of the Heavenly Sword Sect. I still want to marry senior brother Yuan Guoxiu, and I want to give birth to many children for him." The corners of Yang Ye's mouth twitched when he heard this. He was truly speechless. Wei Wei shook her head while a helpless expression covered her face. She said, "Yan Yan, when can you start acting a bit more normally? If you continue acting like this, then not to mention senior brother Yuan, even the janitor of the sect wouldn't dare marry you. Wei Wei, you." Yan Yan had become slightly angry from embarrassment. She seemed to have forgotten that Yang Yi was on the other side, and she shoved her face into Wei Wei's chest and started ceaselessly moving her head left and right. As she did that, she said, "Darling, it seems to have grown bigger. This won't do. I can't be smaller than you. Once I return to the sect, I'll go look for a 1,000-year-old ice-string papaya. That's not enough. If I have the chance, I'll ask senior brother Yuan to give me a good massage as well." The corners of Yang Ye's mouth twitched incessantly. This woman is truly terrifying. Wei Wei's face flushed red, and she glanced at Yan Yan as she said, "You damnable little girl. How could you say such things? Don't you know that there's someone else here? Hey, stop it. I'll toss you down and feed you to the dark beasts if you continue moving your head like that." Such a threat was truly too great to her. She hurriedly stopped, and then she tilted her round face to glance at Yang Yi. Suddenly, she seemed to have thought of something, and her eyes lit up as she said, "Darling, I've thought of a method to escape." Yang Yi suddenly had a bad feeling when he heard this, whereas Wei Wei asked with delight, "What method?" Inin withdrew her claws from Wei Wei's chest, and then she pointed at Yang Yi and said, "Darling, if we toss him down to draw the attention of those dark beasts, then wouldn't we have time to flee?" Yang Ye's face darkened when he heard this. Can she not be a little secretive? "I'm still right here." Wei Wei was first stunned, and then she turned her head to glance at Yang Yi. She pondered deeply for a moment before she said, "You're clearly aware of the situation we face right now. Since someone like you who's at the first heaven realm dared to travel deep into the Grand Myriad Mountains, then I presume you definitely have the ability to take care of your own life. We sisters will be eternally grateful if you're willing to lend us a hand." Yang Yi felt silent. In all honesty, he didn't have any ill feelings towards these two women. To be precise, he had a slightly good impression of them, because they didn't confront him for hiding and watching them from the shadows, and they'd even tried to rescue him. Especially because they were both King Realm experts while he was merely at the First Heaven Realm. Under such circumstances, not only had they not expressed contempt and detest towards him, they even took the trouble to try and rescue him. This caused him to have a slightly good impression of them. However, he could absolutely not summon the lightning eagle because the implications were too severe. When they saw Yang Yi remain silent, both of them remained silent as well. At this moment, they could only place their hopes on Yang Yi. If Yang Yi still shook his head, then they would probably be eaten here. Never mind, I can't just do nothing and refuse to help them. Yang Yi grinned. However, right when he was about to summon the lightning eagle, Yan Yan had suddenly shouted loudly before she pointed ahead with excitement. She said, "Darling, it's senior brother Yan Han and the others. They've come to save us. Haha, we're finally able to escape danger." When he heard this, Yang Yi looked over, and he saw 7 people with wings formed from profound energy were flying swiftly towards them from 300 m away. Yang Yi frowned once more when he saw these people. Shouldn't these geniuses from the other territories have headed to the ancient battlefield? Why have they come to the Grand Myriad Mountains? Wei Wei raised her head and looked over. When she saw their appearances, she instantly heaved a sigh of relief in her heart, while she revealed a faint smile on her face. In less than a few breaths of time, those 7 profounders had arrived in front of Yang Ye's group of 3. The person in the lead of the group of 7 was a young man around the age of 20. He had sharp and slanted brows, starry eyes, a flat and wide nose, and a ramrod-straight figure. As he stood there, the light breeze from the surroundings blew on his ink-black hair, and it caused him to seem indescribably charming and unrestrained. The young man instantly revealed a pleasant smile when he saw Wei Wei, and then he said, "Junior Sister Lu, we've finally found you. Hey, senior brother Yan Han. I'm here as well. Don't forget me when you see the woman you like. All right? Watch out or I'll ask my darling to pay no attention to you." Yan Yan suddenly spoke with displeasure. Yan Han moved his gaze from Lu Weiwei and gazed at Yan Yan before he said with a smile, "How could I dare forget junior sister Kai Yanin?" When he spoke up to hear, he turned to look at Yang Yi before he said, "Who's this brother?" "He's a profounder from the southern territory that we picked up in the Grand Myriad Mountains." Kai Yan Yan said, "Senior brother Yan Han, you said that I'm very bold in the past, but let me tell you that he's even bolder than me. He hasn't even attained the King Realm, yet he actually dared to travel deep into the Grand Myriad Mountains by himself. If he hadn't encountered Wei Wei and me, then he would have probably died a long time ago. A profounder from the Southern Territory? The first Heaven Realm." Yan Han was stunned when he heard Kai Yan Yan, and then he gazed at Yang Yi and said, "You're a profounder from the Southern Territory?" Yang Yi nodded. When they saw Yang Yi nod, a wisp of contempt instantly flashed in the eyes of Yan Han and the other 6 men behind him. One of the men behind him even said bluntly, "I never imagined that we would actually encounter a profounder from the Southern Territory in advance." According to rumor, the profounders of the Southern Territory are at the bottom of the ladder in strength when compared to all the other territories. "It isn't a rumor." Yan Han glanced indifferently at Yang Yi, and he interrupted the man as he said, "For the last 1,000 years, the Southern Territory has always been at the bottom. Especially during the last few rounds, the so-called monstrous geniuses of the Southern Territory were actually not even able to ascend the first level of the Hidden Dragon Pagoda." When he spoke up to hear, Yan Han suddenly chuckled and said, "I heard a so-called quasi-sword emperor has appeared in the Southern Territory. Not only has he comprehended 4th-level sword intent, but he has also attained the enlightened sword heart." Haha! How could such a savage place have someone that has attained the enlightened sword heart? What a huge joke! After all, my heavenly sword sect is a 3rd-rank sect that possesses countless geniuses in the sword Tao. However, there hasn't been a single disciple that has attained the enlightened sword heart. So, how could one appear in the Southern Territory? Right? How could someone with the enlightened sword heart appear in a savage place like the Southern Territory? Not to mention our heavenly sword sect, I've never even heard of one from the Immortal sword sect that's a 5th-rank sect. These profounders of the Southern Territory don't even use their brains when they boast. One of the men by Yan Han's side chimed in, and he glanced intentionally at Yang Yi once he finished speaking. How could Yang Yi not realize that their words were directed at him? Yang Yi wasn't one to grin and bear with the insults of others. So, he immediately glanced at Yan Han and the other young man before he said, "Both of you said that it's impossible for one with the enlightened sword heart to appear in the Southern Territory. Then could it be that the founding ancestor of the Southern Territory's sword sect from 10,000 years ago wasn't one who had attained the enlightened sword heart?" Yan Han and the other young man's expressions turned slightly unsightly when they heard this. The sword sect's founding ancestor had once crushed the geniuses of all the other territories to the point they were convinced of their inferiority. So Yan Han and the others were naturally aware of this. There was a list outside the Hidden Dragon Pagoda, and it was called the Hidden Dragon List. Only the names of profounders who had entered the 5th level, which was the highest level of the pagoda, would appear on the Hidden Dragon List. After countless years of time, only the names of 7 people were on the Hidden Dragon List, and the sword sect's founding ancestor, the Unfettered One, was second on the list. Yang Ye's actions of mentioning the Sword Sect's founding ancestor was undoubtedly like slapping the two of them on the face. Yan Han's eyes narrowed slightly before he said, "So, you mean that person called Yang Yi has really comprehended the enlightened sword heart?" Lu Weiwei's beautiful brows had knit together slightly when she saw that the other members of her sect seemed to be targeting Yang Yi, and then she said, "Senior brother Yan, let's deal with those dark beasts below us first. It's just a group of animals." Yan Han grunted coldly, and a wisp of a smile had appeared on his face when he gazed at Lu Weiwei. He said, "There's no need to be anxious, junior sister Lu. Even though they are huge in number, they're just some brainless animals. Just watch how senior brother breaks open the stomachs of these dark beasts and retrieves their inner cores. Their inner cores are truly treasures." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly turned to look at Yang Yi while a wisp of an evil smile arose on the corners of his mouth. He said, "Friend, since you dared to step foot into the Grand Myriad Mountains while at the First Heaven Realm, I presume you have some sort of shocking ability. It just so happens that we haven't met any geniuses from the Southern Territory. So, how about you show us a little of your strength so we can see how formidable the monstrous geniuses of the Southern Territory are, all right? Yeah, show us a little. Let us see exactly how weak, strong the profounders of the Southern Territory are. Haha, forget it. He's only at the First Heaven Realm in the end. So, not to mention a group of king-rank dark beasts, he's probably not even able to deal with one. How could that be possible? Since he dared to enter the Grand Myriad Mountains while he's only at the First Heaven Realm, then he definitely possesses some sort of shocking trump card. Perhaps he's that goddamn fellow from the Southern Territory that obtained the first position on the Ascension rankings, Yang Yi, who possesses the enlightened sword heart." Haha! When he heard all of them, Yan Han feigned surprise and glanced at Yang Yi before he asked, "You wouldn't really be Yang Yi who possesses the enlightened sword heart, right?" Yang Yi glanced indifferently at them before he chuckled and said, "My name really is Yang Yi." Yan Han was stunned, and then he roared with laughter. He laughed for a while before he said, "You're Yang Yi? Yang Yi who possesses the enlightened sword heart? Haha! Come. Let us see exactly how formidable a genius who possesses the enlightened sword heart is. Haha! Enough!" Right at this moment, Lu Weiwei, who'd remained silent until now, had suddenly shouted furiously. She glanced at Yang Yi before she turned to gaze at Yan Han, and then he said, "Senior brother Yan, even though his cultivation is low, you still shouldn't ridicule and mock him like this. You weren't like this in the past." Kai Yanyan was unable to continue watching as well, and she immediately said, "Senior brother Yan, even though this kid's strength is slightly weak, his appearance is slightly ugly, and he's from the Southern Territory. But he hasn't done anything bad to us in the end, so why do you have to bully the weak?" If others heard that a group of disciples from the Heavenly Sword Sect had bullied a profounder at the First Heaven Realm, then wouldn't it be extremely humiliating? Yang Yi rolled his eyes. What does she mean by slightly ugly? Does she know how to speak? Yan Han's expression grew slightly unsightly when he heard them, and as he gazed at Yang Yi, a wisp of a gloomy expression flashed in the depths of his eyes. However, when he looked at Lu Weiwei and Kai Yanyan, he revealed an extremely gentle smile instead and said, "Junior sisters are right. Senior brother was mistaken. Let's not talk about all of this and deal with the group of beasts below us." When he spoke up to hear, he glanced at Yang Yi and said indifferently, "Stay at the side later and don't move about rashly, otherwise, don't blame us if you die." Yang Yi shook his head. He was just about to speak when the ground in the distance started to quake violently. Subsequently, a large and dense black cloud had suddenly appeared in the sky, and when it came slightly close, the expressions of Yan Han and the others had changed violently because it wasn't a black cloud but countless flying dark beasts. It wasn't just the sky. There were countless dark beasts on the ground as well, and it was impossible to see the end of them. This time, Yan Han and the others revealed expressions of terror. If it was a few hundred or even 1,000, then they would still be able to flee if they wanted. But if it was this many, then not to mention them, even a spirit realm expert would probably be unable to escape. "We're doomed. We're doomed. As she gazed at the horde of dark beasts that blotted out the sky and covered the ground, Kai Yanyan had a ghastly pale countenance as she muttered, "We're really finished. Senior brother Yuan. I'm really going to be eaten by these dark beasts this time. Senior brother Yuan. Save me." Right at this moment, an enormous rock arrived around 60 m away from Yan Han and the others. There was a young man in a luxurious robe standing on the head of the rock. Yang Yi was slightly stunned when he saw this young man because it was none other than that mysterious dark beast from the Grand Myriad Mountains. Luo Shui. The Northern Territory? Luo Shui spoke indifferently from atop the rock. Yan Han didn't dare act proudly and immediately nodded before he said, "Exactly." Luo Shui grunted coldly and said, "Why didn't all of you head to the ancient battlefield and have come to my Grand Myriad Mountains instead?" Yan Han was instantly slightly annoyed when he heard Luo Shui's questioning tone. However, he didn't dare flare up and could only suppress the rage in his heart before he said, "We didn't come here with any ill intent. It's merely because a slight mishap occurred when 2 of our junior sisters were teleported, and they were teleported to the Grand Myriad Mountains. So, we came to look for them." "No ill intent?" A wisp of a cold smile arose on the corners of Luo Shui's mouth, and he said, "In a short period of a single day, over 1,000 king-rank dark beasts of my Grand Myriad Mountains were killed. I presume there are hundreds of king-rank inner cores within all of your spatial rings, right? This is what you mean by coming here without any ill intent and merely to look for someone." Yan Han hadn't expected that what they'd done would actually have been noticed, nor had he imagined that the Grand Myriad Mountains would dispatch so many dark beasts to pursue them. His heart immediately shook, and then he glanced at the surroundings. After that, his gaze descended onto Lu Weiwei. His gaze flickered a little while he hesitated for a long time, and then he took a deep breath as he decided in his heart. When he saw Yan Han remain silent, Luo Shui's gaze turned icy cold, and he said, "Since you refuse to speak, then all of you can pay with your lives." As soon as he finished speaking, he was about to command the horde of dark beasts to attack. However, right at this moment, Yan Han suddenly flipped his palm, and then a talisman appeared out of thin air, and then Yan Han's figure vanished mysteriously on the spot. Everyone was stunned upon witnessing this scene, and this included Luo Shui. He vanished just like that? It's a random teleportation talisman. Right at this moment, someone from amongst the disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect said, "I never expected that senior brother Yan Han actually possessed a random teleportation talisman. Haha. Even more surprising is that he actually completely disregarded all of us in the face of danger, and he fled without saying a thing to us. Haha." Kai Yanyan felt slight disbelief and said, "Senior brother. Tui, that dog Yen is actually such a person? That piece of shit, trash. To think I called him my senior brother for so many years and even cooked for him. Oh, how fucking infuriating. Weiwei, it's fortunate that you've never agreed to his pursuit. Otherwise, you would regret it forever." Lu Weiwei shook her head while a wisp of disappointment flashed in her eyes. She had a slight good impression of Yan Han, but she'd never imagined that he would act in such a way during a moment of life and death. Yan Han fleeing abruptly was definitely quite a blow to these disciples from the Heavenly Sword Sect. While they were in the sect, Yan Han had always been very good at playing the role of senior brother. However, they'd never imagined that this senior brother, who'd always been extremely good to everyone, would actually not hesitate to abandon them and flee by himself. Amongst the people present here, it was probably Yang Yi who was the most understanding, because he'd seen numerous people like Yan Han. Yan Han couldn't be said to be wrong. After all, even ants wanted to drag out their tiny existence, let alone humans. Of course, Yang Yi wasn't capable of abandoning his friends. Even though he was very cold-blooded at most times and could even be said to be selfish, he was absolutely unable to abandon his friends so that he could survive. Not everything in the world could go as one wanted, and the only thing important was a clear conscience. No matter what Yang Yi did, he always strived to maintain a clear conscience. This is what the monstrous geniuses of the other territories are like? Luo Shui shook his head lightly and spoke in a light voice. Right at this moment, Lu Weiwei took a deep breath before she flipped her palm, and a sword appeared in her hand. She said, "Disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect, heed my call. Form the sword formation." After Yanhan left, Lu Weiwei had become the most senior amongst them, so they didn't hesitate at all upon hearing her. Their figures flashed to stand around Lu Weiwei before they withdrew their swords. At the same time, a strand of terrifying sword chi suddenly surged out from the swords in their hands, and then it formed a strange vortex of sword chi. The members of the Heavenly Sword Sect were ready to die, so they didn't hold back at all, and the profound energy within their bodies surged out like a torrent. With the profound energy within them surging madly into the vortex of sword chi, it revolved faster and faster while growing larger and larger. Moreover, the terrifying sword chi contained within it was extremely sharp to the point it was impossible to look directly at it. Yang Yi had a slightly solemn expression as he gazed at the sword formation they'd formed. Even though he didn't have a good impression of them, he had no choice but to admit that they were very strong. Especially the sword formation. The terrifying energy contained within it was something that even he really feared. However, while they faced the dense horde of dark beasts within the Grand Myriad Mountains, it was useless no matter how formidable that vortex of sword chi was. Not to mention that the mysterious Luo Shui was present here as well. In other words, they were utterly unable to avoid death. These disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect seemed to be aware that they couldn't avoid death, so they had resolute expressions. Of course, there was even more fear and sorrow on their faces. Regardless of whether it was humans or dark beasts, would anyone not wish to live if it was possible? Luo Shui grunted coldly as he gazed at the vortex-shaped sword formation the members of the Heavenly Sword Sect had created. Right when he was about to give the order to attack, his gaze had suddenly glanced over inadvertently and noticed Yang Yi, who was standing behind the members of the Heavenly Sword Sect. Luo Shui frowned when he saw Yang Yi, and then he said, "It's you!" The members of the Heavenly Sword Sect were stunned when they heard this, and then they gazed at Yang Yi with puzzled expressions in their eyes. Yang Yi was first stunned when he heard Luo Shui speak to him, and then he laughed bitterly. The little fellow can't show itself right now. So how would I flee if Luo Shui intends to make a move against me? Yang Yi didn't give it any further thought. He strode forward, gazed at Luo Shui, and then he said, "The last time we met, you led countless dark beasts to surround me, but I never imagined that our next meeting would be under similar circumstances. Could it be that we're bound to rival each other?" Luo Shui chuckled, and then he glanced at Yang Ye's shoulder before he said, "Where is it?" Yang Yi frowned when he heard this. He was naturally aware of who Luo Shui was speaking about. Could it be that the Dark Beast Empire still hasn't stopped targeting the little fellow? As if he knew what Yang Yi thought, Luo Shui continued, "I'm just asking about it, and I have no intention to make a move against it." When he spoke up to hear, Luo Shui hesitated for a moment before he said, "If it's possible, then can you ask it to come out and meet me?" Yang Yi heaved a sigh of relief when he heard Luo Shui. If Luo Shui really intended to target the little fellow, then he would be in danger. Because Yang Yi would definitely perish before this dense expanse of dark beasts if he didn't possess the assistance of the little fellow's bloodline pressure. Yang Yi pondered deeply for a moment, and then he shook his head and said, "Not right now." Luo Shui didn't get angry because of this. He merely nodded lightly before he glanced at the disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect who stood by Yang Ye's side. He said, "Are they your friends?" When they heard Luo Shui, the hearts of those disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect shook. Even an idiot would be able to discern that the relationship between Yang Yi and Luo Shui wasn't ordinary. In other words, their fate was probably in Yang Ye's hands. However, when they recalled the scene of them ridiculing and mocking Yang Yi just now, the bitterness of their faces grew even denser. Yang Yi had discerned the meaning behind Luo Shui's words as well. However, he understood that Luo Shui was absolutely not giving him face, and Luo Shui was giving the little fellow face instead. Otherwise, not to mention these disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect, Luo Shui would probably annihilate him as well. Yang Yi glanced at them before he said indifferently, "They aren't." What a joke. Yang Yi wasn't one that repaid enmity with kindness. He liked to repay evil with evil. Their expressions instantly became unsightly when they heard Yang Yi. Right at this moment, Yang Yi suddenly pointed at Lu Weiwei and Kai Yanyan, and then he said, "These two are." Luo Shui glanced at them, and then he glanced at Yang Yi before he said, "The three of you can leave." Yang Yi nodded. Right when he was about to leave, Lu Weiwei suddenly blocked his path and was about to say something. However, Yang Yi shook his head before she could speak and said, "Their fate has nothing to do with me. Save those idiots from the Heavenly Sword Sect." What a joke. Yang Yi wasn't a kind-hearted or magnanimous person, and if he wasn't worried about those two assassins, then he would have summoned his army of dark beasts and annihilated these fellows. Meanwhile, Kai Yanyan gazed at Yang Yi and said, "Hey, even though they'd gone a bit too far just now, their mistakes don't warrant death. Moreover, didn't my darling apologize on their behalf? As a man, you can't be so petty, otherwise I would really look down upon you. It's my mistake?" Yang Yi felt extreme disdain towards Kai Yanyan's words. If it wasn't out of consideration for the fact that she'd spoken on his behalf earlier, he really wanted to just leave. "Friend." Meanwhile, Lu Weiwei said, "The actions and words of these fellow disciples of mine were wrong. But just as Yan said, their mistakes don't warrant death. All of us will definitely be eternally grateful if you lend us a hand." As she spoke, she bowed to Yang Yi. Yang Yi sighed. There was no relationship between this woman and him, yet she was still able to lend him a hand. Even though he didn't need it at the time, he couldn't deny that her actions had made him have a good impression of her. So, that was the reason why he was willing to save her. As for these disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect, Yang Yi raised his head to glance at the other disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect, and then he suddenly said, "Do you think they will be grateful to me after I save them?" Lu Weiwei was stunned, and then she looked at them. At this moment, even though they hadn't revealed an embarrassing appearance, their countenances were still ghastly pale while the terror and horror in their eyes were not concealed at all. Of course, the most important aspect was the gazes they looked at Yang Yi with. Yes, their gazes towards Yang Yi didn't carry even a shred of a guilty or pleading expression. Their eyes only had an icy cold expression within them, and there was even a little resentment amidst their cold expressions. They were extraordinary geniuses of the Northern Territory. They were the youngest King Realm experts in the Northern Territory. They enjoyed countless forms of glory, yet their fate was actually in the hands of a First Heaven Realm profounder. How could they accept this? The thing geniuses lacked the least was pride. So, even if it was at a moment of life and death, they hadn't spoken out to see assistance from Yang Yi. Lu Weiwei sighed when she saw their expressions, and then she turned to look at Yang Yi before she said, "Don't worry. I won't allow them to repay kindness with enmity. Please." Yang Yi gazed at Lu Weiwei for a short while before he gazed at Luo Shui, and then Luo Shui immediately said indifferently, "You intend to protect all of them?" Yang Yi shrugged and said, "It can't be helped. I owe her a favor. Being greedy isn't good." Luo Shui looked Yang Yi straight in the eye as he spoke. "You ought to be clearly aware that you're unable to stop me if I want to leave." Yang Yi met Luo Shui's gaze and spoke in an indifferent tone. These words were purely a bluff. If the little fellow had awakened, then Luo Shui would definitely be unable to stop him from leaving. But the problem was that the little fellow hadn't awakened. Luo Shui frowned. Even though he was extremely annoyed by Yang Ye's words, he had to admit that he was really unable to stop Yang Yi, while that mysterious little fellow was by Yang Ye's side. It was even to the extent that if the mysterious little fellow joined forces with those disciples from the Heavenly Sword Sect, then it would definitely be an enormous calamity for the dark beasts in the surroundings. When they saw Luo Shui fall silent, the hearts of disciples from the Heavenly Sword Sect had constricted. They didn't want to die in the end. Of course, if it was possible to live, then would anyone be willing to die? However, at this moment they couldn't avoid death just because they wanted to. Their fate was entire in Luo Shui's hands. So, when they saw Luo Shui fall silent, they couldn't help but become anxious. As for why Luo Shui had fallen silent and hesitated, they'd unconsciously forgotten this key point. Actually, Yang Yi was slightly nervous right now as well. If Luo Shui really made a move against them, then he could only turn around and flee, because he couldn't resist the dense horde of dark beasts without the little fellow by his side. As for Lu Weiwei and Kai Yanyan, cold sweat had even seeped out from their hands. At this moment, they didn't consider why Luo Shui was giving Yang Yi face, and it wasn't just them. Even the other disciples from the Heavenly Sword Sect hadn't thought about this. At this moment, they were only thinking of a single thing, and it was about whether they could avoid death. After a short while, Luo Shui looked at Yang Yi and said, "You're heading to the ancient battlefield?" Yang Yi was stunned. He didn't know why Luo Shui had suddenly asked this question, but he didn't conceal it and nodded before he said, "How could I not go and witness such a grand event?" Luo Shui suddenly smiled when he heard this, and then he said, "Fine, I won't take their lives for now. We'll meet again at the ancient battlefield. I hope you'll be able to give me an even more extraordinary surprise at that time." "You're heading to the ancient battlefield as well?" Yang Yi frowned as he spoke. "Of course," Luo Shui said. "This is a grand event of the entire continent. So how could my Dark Beast Empire not attend?" As soon as he finished speaking, Luo Shui glanced at the disciples from the Heavenly Sword Sect and said, "If you don't leave the Grand Myriad Mountains in 4 hours of time, then don't leave forever. Remember, the Grand Myriad Mountains doesn't welcome people from the other territories." As soon as he finished speaking, he didn't stay here any longer, and he led the countless dark beasts to withdraw like the tide. The members of the Heavenly Sword Sect instantly heaved sighs of relief when they saw Luo Shui lead the dark beasts away. No matter what, they finally didn't have to die at a place that was far away from home. "Thank you." Meanwhile, Lu Weiwei gazed at Yang Yi as she spoke. Yang Yi shook his head, and then he gazed at the members of the other Heavenly Sword Sect and said, "There's no need for that. You lent me a hand earlier, so I lent you a hand now. We can be considered to be even now. Right, just as you said, I hope." When he spoke up to hear, Yang Ye's expression suddenly changed. After that, a wisp of wild joy surged into his eyes, because right at that instant just now, he'd sensed that the violet barrier of light which covered the little fellow had suddenly started to tremble. In other words, the little fellow was about to awaken. "I have other matters to attend to, so I'll be taking my leave." After he noticed that the little fellow was about to awaken, Yang Yi didn't want to stay here any longer and intended to leave. Presently, he just wanted to find a quiet place and wait for the little fellow to awaken. The women were stunned. However, right when they were about to say something, the other 6 disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect who stood behind them had flashed over to surround Yang Yi, who was about to leave. Yang Yi's eyes narrowed when he saw them surround him. He glanced at the 6 of them before he spoke with ridicule. "What? This is how your Heavenly Sword Sect treats someone that saved your lives? What are all of you doing?" Meanwhile, Lu Weiwei walked over to Yang Yi's side, and then she glared angrily at these fellow disciples of hers. Obviously, their actions had infuriated her. "Senior Sister Lu, don't interfere in this matter." A slightly fat man amongst the 6 of them spoke in a low voice. "We disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect suffered such a humiliation today. If he were to spread the news of it, then our Heavenly Sword Sect would become the laughingstock of the entire Profounder continent. At that time, all of us would have committed a crime against the sect." Exactly. If the members of the other territories knew that we'd actually relied on a First Heaven Realm Profounder of the Southern Territory to plead on our behalf and save our lives, then we wouldn't just bring shame to the Heavenly Sword Sect. We would have brought shame to the entire Northern Territory as well. So, he can't be allowed to live. He's just a Profounder at the First Heaven Realm, and he's even from a lousy place like the Southern Territory. I was already annoyed by him since the beginning, so he deserves death. Since they were able to come to the Southern Territory, it was already sufficient to prove the potential and strength they possessed. And it was exactly because of this that they would feel humiliated when they had to rely on Yang Yi to plead on their behalf in order to survive. In their eyes, a Profounder at the First Heaven Realm was no different than an ant. But they'd relied on an ant to survive just now. How could they who boasted about being extraordinary geniuses of the Southern Territory endure something like this? So, at the moment that Luo Shui had left, They'd very tacitly chosen to act against Yang Yi. As he gazed at those disciples from the Heavenly Sword Sect who didn't conceal their killing intent at all, Yang Yi grinned, and then he gazed at Lu Weiwei who was about to speak and said, "Look, at most times, one must never try to be a good person, right? Besides that, I have to say that all of you disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect are really trash. First, that senior brother of yours abandoned all of you and left. Now, these ungrateful fellows intend to act against the person who saved their lives. Alas, if I knew this would happen, then I should have allowed them to become food for those dark beasts. What do you think? You regret it now?" The slightly fat young man sneered and said, "I don't know why you're able to negotiate with that mysterious shape-shifted dark beast, but it isn't important anymore. The important thing is that you must die here today. Don't say that I didn't give you a chance. You can choose any one of the 6 of us. So long as you're able to survive 3 moves and kowtow 10 times to every single one of the 6 of us, then I'll spare your life. All right? Ha ha!" The other disciples instantly roared with laughter when they heard him, and they laughed in an extremely arrogant and complacent manner. "Huang Yan, do you really intend to act in this way?" Lu Weiwei gazed at the slightly fat young man while her gaze had turned slightly cold. The slightly fat young man called Huang Yan seemed to be slightly fearful of Lu Weiwei, and he immediately restrained the arrogant expression on his face before he said, "Senior Sister Lu, all of us really respect you, and we don't want to go against your intentions. However, this is related to the reputation of our Heavenly Sword Sect and the Northern Territory. So, I hope that Senior Sister Lu doesn't interfere in this matter. The 6 of us will naturally apologize and seek out punishment from Senior Sister Lu once we're done here." Lu Weiwei sighed, and then she said, "Huang Yan, you're not an idiot. Could it be that you haven't noticed?" "Noticed what?" Huang Yan frowned. Lu Weiwei shook his head, and then she glanced at Huang Yan with slight disappointment before she said, "Since the army of dark beasts surrounded us until the moment that the 6 of you surrounded him, his expression has remained extremely calm from the beginning until the end. He hasn't revealed even a trace of nervousness or fear. Is this normal? Moreover, why would that mysterious shape-shifted dark beast from before give him face? He's just a profounder at the first heaven realm, so why would he dare to travel to the central region of the Grand Myriad Mountains by himself? Have you thought about all of this?" Lu Weiwei had said all of this in front of Yang Yi, and she hadn't concealed it from him at all. So Yang Ye's gaze towards her had changed upon hearing all of this, because he realized that he'd slightly underestimated this woman. Huang Yan and the other 5 disciples fell silent. They weren't idiots. They'd overlooked all of this because of those dark beasts just now, but now that Lu Weiwei had mentioned it, they thought about it for a moment and noticed that it really was unusual. A first heaven realm profounder dared to head deep into the central region of the Grand Myriad Mountains and remain without the slightest shred of nervousness or fear while facing all of them who were King Realm experts. Was this because he was brave? Or perhaps because he had some sort of shocking trump card? After a short while, a wisp of a savage expression flashed through Huang Yan's eyes, and he said, "No matter what trump card he possesses, he's only at the first heaven realm, and he doesn't even have the ability to fight back in front of us. If we don't eliminate him now, then we would be finished if he exposes what happened here today. Attack! Let me see who dares to do that." Right at this moment, Lu Weiwei flipped her palm, and her sword appeared in her hand before she pointed it at those disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect. "Senior Sister Lu, you intend to make a move against us for a piece of trash from the Southern Territory who has no relationship with you?" Huang Yan had a slightly unsightly expression as he spoke in a low voice. Lu Weiwei paid no attention to Huang Yan, and she said to Yang Yi instead, "Leave quickly. I'll stop them." "Can you stop them?" Yang Yi sighed as he glanced at her. In the past, he didn't believe that a purely kind person existed in the world because he'd never encountered such a person. No matter if it was Elder Mu, his master Lin Shan, Su Qingshi, or Xianxia, all of them had only come into contact with him because of his natural talent or other benefits. So, he didn't believe that a purely kind-hearted person existed in the world. However, after he encountered this woman, his thoughts were shaken. Needless to say, even though he didn't need the woman's help or protection, it caused Yang Yi to have a strange feeling. It wasn't a feeling of like or love, and he just felt that this woman could become his friend. A person would definitely encounter all sorts of people throughout one's lifetime. Many of these people would become one's friends, but even more would just become passerby. Yet now, he had a feeling that he didn't to be a passerby in her life, or it could be said that he didn't want her to be a passerby in his life. Yes, every single person should have a friend that didn't mind one's appearance, status, or wealth. Yang Yi took a deep breath before he shook his head and chuckled. He disregarded those disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect before he gazed at Lu Weiwei and said, "Allow me to introduce myself, Yang Yi from South Peace City." When he spoke these words, he suddenly felt his entire body become light. After that, his eyes gradually opened wide before his eyes were filled with shock and pleasant surprise. Yang Yi had always advanced courageously when it came to the sword Dao, and he'd never hesitated or given up. When it came to love, he'd hesitated and even felt a feeling of inferiority. However, he'd changed later on. So, he dared to loudly proclaim his love to Xianxia, and he dared to loudly promise that he would come to the sword sect to get her in the future. That change had allowed his mental state to improve, and it had allowed his sword intent to advance into the 4th level. It was also at that time which Yang Yi had understood a principle. That principle was that regardless of whether it was love, friendship, or the sword Dao, one should advance courageously and never hesitate or give up. To put it in simpler terms, if one felt affection, then one should speak of it and act on it. To put it in even simpler terms, one should face the thoughts in one's heart without holding back at all. When facing an enemy, since the enemy caused one pain, then one should cause even more pain to the enemy. When facing someone that one liked, then affection was affection. There was no need to conceal it or fake it, and it should be proclaimed loudly. Just like this very moment, he wanted to become friends with her, so he didn't hesitate to speak. Of course, this wasn't the main point. The main point was that he'd understood something of utmost importance at that instant just now, and it was that he should face the intentions in his heart. Because he understood this, he noticed that he'd attained the 5th level of sword intent after he spoke those words. Yes, he'd attained the 5th level of the sword intent now. The sword intent was an unreal and ethereal thing. There was no method or technique to improve it, and there was only a single way to improve it, the improvement of one's mental state. Only the improvement or transformation of one's mental state would allow sword intent to improve along with it. However, the improvement of the mental state was even more difficult to attain than sword intent. Those disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect were stunned. Has this fellow gone mad? He's actually introducing himself now? But why does his name sound so familiar? Lu Weiwei was stunned as well. She hadn't expected that Yang Yi would actually introduce himself to her at this moment. What does he intend to do? Could it be that he isn't aware of the situation he's in right now? At this moment, Lu Weiwei had the impulse to bash Yang Yi up. "Hey, have you gone mad from fear?" Meanwhile, Kai Yanyan suddenly patted Yang Yi on the shoulder and said, "It's already at a time like this, yet you aren't fleeing quickly but have introduced yourself instead? Yang Yi? Yang." When she spoke up to hear, she suddenly gazed at Yang Yi with disbelief, and then the corners of her mouth twitched slightly as she said, You are that Yang Yi from the Southern Territory, who's said to be the quasi-sword emperor that has comprehended 4th level sword intent and attained the enlightened sword heart." When they heard her, those other disciples were instantly stunned, and then their gazes towards Yang Yi were filled with shock and bewilderment. Yang Yi was actually quite famous, because he possessed 4th level sword intent and the enlightened sword heart. Especially the enlightened sword heart, because no to mention the entire Southern Territory, it was extraordinarily rare even throughout the entire profounder continent. In any case, even if it was in the history of the Heavenly Sword Sect, only a single person had attained the enlightened sword heart before the age of 20. That person was the Heavenly Sword Sect's founding ancestor. Moreover, after the founding ancestor of the Heavenly Sword Sect, not a single disciple from the Heavenly Sword Sect had attained the enlightened sword heart before the age of 20. Yet now one had appeared before them. After feeling shocked, besides Lu Weiwei and Kai Yanyan, the other 6 disciples exchanged glances, and all of them noticed ghastly killing intent in each other's eyes.